Welcome to The Fourth Bottom Line, the podcast where we meet people from business, charities and politics who are a force for good. In each episode, I talk to my guests about their inner side and how their internal changes have led to their outer success stories. We talk about the failures, spirituality and sometimes the painful experiences that have made them the unique individuals they are today. The main aim being for us to learn from and be inspired by them for our own lives. So, if you desire change in yourself and the world around you, do keep listening. And please remember to hit subscribe on your podcast platform of choice to make sure you never miss an episode. Hello, my name is Paul Hargreaves. I'm the founder and Chief Empowerment Officer of Cotswold Fair and Flourish, two businesses that put people and planet before profit. In 2015, we became one of the first B Corps in the UK, and I've written two books, Forces for Good and The Fourth Bottom Line. I'm passionate about changing the world for better and realised many years ago that to do this, we must also change ourselves. The outer impact of people, planet and profit has to be mirrored by an inner change, and that's what I call my fourth bottom line. What you say is probably different to how people think you're going to be in a room. How much has that impacted what you've done, do you think?
Well, I think it is probably vintage me, because I think they don't expect someone wearing pearls to say fuck off. And actually, when you're coming to a business school and you're a bit terrified because you think, I don't really know anything about these kind of university setups and I'll feel stupid. If you have me walking in and chatting away, then it demystifies it, it makes it feel accessible.
My guest today is Dr. Eve Poole, OBE. Welcome to The Fourth Bottom Line.
Hello.
Eve has a BA from Durham, an MBA from Edinburgh, and a PhD from Cambridge. She's written several books, including Robot Souls and Leadersmithing, which are both the subject of popular TEDx talks. For 15 years, she taught leadership at Ashridge Business School, after working for the Church Commissioners and for Deloitte Consulting, where she specialised in change management for the financial services sector. Eve currently chairs the Woodward Corporation, and amongst several other previous positions was the third Church Estates Commissioner for England and the first female chairman of Gordonstoun School from 2015 to 2021, where in her first year all her speeches were about handbags. In 2023, Eve was awarded an OBE for services to education and gender equality, which seems quite a long way from her attendance at the Lucy Clayton Finishing School, where she was taught to curtsy and how to exit vehicles without showing her knickers. You did give me that information, by the way. I haven't made that up. Let's start with that, because I think you went to a state school, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I went to Madras College in St Andrews, which was just the local school that everyone went to.
Okay, so what did the finishing school? Talk to us about that.
Well, I had a
and
very
why
glamorous
it
aunt, and she had a godmother who had been disappointed because of the war and had never married, and she was a bit of a county lady, and she had decided to pay for my aunt to go to Lucy Clayton in the 60s, which is when Joanna Lumley and everyone else were going. And it's where you sort of learn how to model, which was really designed to get you a decent husband, because you could sort of do the season and trot about wearing the right kind of kit and people would immediately propose. And
Did it work?
Well, it did work for me, actually, ironically. So fast forward to me being on the MBA in Edinburgh, which is where my aunt was living, and she was horrified when I used to go home and tell her what I'd been learning. She said, they're not teaching you anything useful about manners and people. So she decided I ought to spend my summer before I went off to Deloitte at finishing school. And it was a very good wheeze, because the second I got to Deloitte, I was on a training course in Miami Airport and met my husband. So
Right, okay. So it did
hooray
work.
for Lucy Clayton.
So how many weeks was it?
It was 2 weeks. They do full courses. Actually now, I think the franchise has been sold. They had diversified into doing either nannying or secretarial, because they had shrewdly realised that's how you met husbands these days, now that the season isn't really what it was in Georgian times. So, I think there are sort of manners things. But it was a very sensible personal impact course, really. And they spent quite a lot of time doing transaction analysis and psychometrics and interview practice and all kinds of practical stuff, as well as trotting about up and down stairs in and out of taxis and all that kind of thing.
I think you're definitely the first guest I've had who's been to finishing school.
Well, it was a very useful thing that I was learning how to curtsy, because then I eventually did have to go and do the business in front of not only the Princess Royal, but then thereafter the King. And at least I knew that I could authoritatively curtsy, having learned
this was the OBE, yeah?
Yes, and also as part of the whole Gordonstoun thing, the Princess Royal is the warden there, so I had to meet her on a regular basis.
Okay, we'll come on to that a bit later. But I want to start by asking a bit more about your childhood. And in particular, I mean, you were described to me by both the people I talked to in preparation for this as having incredibly strong values, massively values-led, and not prepared to do anything that didn't fit in with those values. So how did they emerge, those values? Is it from your early years, your parents? How do you think?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I was part of an extraordinary family. There were four of us. My father was a classics teacher in Dundee in the state schools, and my mum stayed at home, although she later had a career as a genealogist. And even my great-granny had been to university. She was one of the very first to go to Aberystwyth University. She graduated in 1910. So there was this huge tradition of educated women in my family. And there were three girls and a boy in my family. We were all hugely competitive, and very competitive with my cousins and pretty much everyone else we could come anywhere near. So there was definitely a sort of culture of excellence in my family that we all had to sort of crack on and be marvellous, and definitely go to university so as not to let the side down. So I suppose I learnt quite a lot about, applying yourself and trying hard and, those kinds of effort to values, if you like. But I remember very vividly sitting in the garden one day when I was probably about 6 or 7, and the local vicar came round, and he was sat in one of those sort of deck chairs. It's quite difficult if you're a rather portly gentleman to get out of. And
not just portly gentleman, I sometimes struggle myself. But
and he had come to visit my parents because at that time the church choir was all boys. And it had occurred to him that it'd be a good idea if it went mixed. And he thought the best way for it to go mixed immediately was to have the 3 Poole girls join it. And so he'd come around to petition my parents that we should become the girls in the church choir. So I probably started singing in church choir when I was about 7 or 8 and kept that up for years. So I think because you have a job to do, you go every week, and you just learn a lot from being in that culture, which is probably why I then went off to do theology and everything else. So I think those two things really, the family and the church, were the reason I have quite an evolved set of values that I'm quite bossy about.
So that I mean, again, that is to have someone going to university, a woman going to university in 1910 is pretty unusual, I think. I don't know what the ratio was back then. It was very low. It must have come with some pressure as well, didn't it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, also, my 2 big sisters, one had got into Cambridge, the next one got to Oxford. I applied to both to try and even the odds and failed to get into either. So it was even more of a problem that I was the first one of the 3 girls not to have made it to Oxbridge. So I did very much feel that I had to not let the side down and I had to sort of crack on. But I think that's quite good because it does make you try very hard. And it felt very supportive in my family, but very, very clear. I mean, we'd come back and, my dad would say, what did you get in your test? And you'd say 99%. You'd go, 99%? What did you get wrong then?
That sounds like my dad, yeah. No pressure then.
I think it's quite good practice, though. If you've had pressure of that sort, when you get into the workplace, the pressure is neither here nor there.
Yeah, but it also... It can create a lack of acceptance, I think. I can talk about my mum and dad because they're not around anymore. I'm a bit freer. But yes, in my case, he was very much like that. I got 3 A's and an S level, and I think I didn't get the top grade in the S level, so, okay, what's the problem there? Hang on a minute, I've got 3 A's.
I've done quite well.
And I think I probably then spent the first 20 years of my adult life looking for acceptance and recognition. Were you the same?
Well, I think so. And I think you do have to be pretty careful as a parent, because you need to know that the pressure you're putting on is appropriate. And I'm not sure my parents really knew whether we could get 100%. I think they just assumed, obviously, if we were Poole children, that would be a kind of self-evident. And it was lucky that we were quite capable and generally were able to perform. And I think it would have been a bit of a disaster if any of us had not had that sort of capacity, because I'm not sure in my family it would be culturally acceptable not to have been sort of a straight A person, really. And I suppose that has given me a relentlessness around my approach to other people, which is I had to try very hard, work very hard. So I tend to be pretty rude if people aren't willing to put in the time and aren't willing to put in the effort. And of course, there's all kinds of reasons why you wouldn't. But I tend to be quite cross with people who don't.
Because you're a mum now of twins.
Yes.
So how has it affected your parenting?
I think I'm a much better parent because I'm a later parent. And so I had enough time and distance from my own family and had achieved enough in my own professional life to have learned that actually hothousing children is probably not wise, and it's not respectful of who they are either. I think what was also helpful is by the time I had them, I'd had 10 years teaching leadership, where you spend a lot of time thinking about coaching, thinking about good questions, learning about different personalities, all that stuff. So I actually came to parenting with a huge kit bag that my parents never had. And that's actually been practically very helpful. You'll have to ask them, though, whether it actually means anything.
Yes, leadersmithing could just as much be applied to being a parent.
Exactly.
A lot of the principles in there, couldn't
yeah.
it? So if you could give yourself one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
I don't think they tell you how difficult leadership is in terms of the wear and tear. I had researched and written about that as part of writing Leadersmithing, but I think it wasn't until I became a leader myself that I realised the sort of technicalities of it, that you are a figurehead, which means people expect you to take the blame, suck it up, do all these kinds of things because of who you are, and it's not personal. But if they want to be furious with the organisation, they feel they have every right to be directly furious with you. And it's always your fault. And quite often you're making decisions in situations where there can't be a right answer.
Yeah.
You just have to make a decision in order for the organisation to move on. And then, of course, it's your fault. You feel dreadful, all that stuff. So I suppose intellectually I knew about that, but I didn't know how that would feel until I did those jobs and realised how painful leadership is. So I don't know what that would mean in terms of advice, but it is something about being very, very careful about what you will commit to leading, because there's an awful lot of things that are just not worth it.
So you sound like you're talking from experience. I know you are, but is that going to affect what you do in the future, do you think?
Yeah, I definitely have allergic reactions now to certain situations and scenarios, because I know what it will cost me to lead at the level at which I need to be able to lead. And there are an awful lot of situations, people, organisations, worlds that I just will not submit to doing that in, because I know I will have sleeplessness, I'll have anxiety, I'll have stress, I'll have all these other things. People will hate me routinely because of my role, not because of who I am. And it needs to feel worth it. So I'm now quite considered about what I'll do and what I won't do.
And how much of those difficulties, shall we say, was to do with you being, I mean, a couple of the roles we mentioned at the beginning, you were in quite a male world as a woman. How much of it was to do with that, and how much was it just because of the culture of the organisation?
I've really thought about that, because for years I would not have said that there was a gender issue at all with my life, and I would not have conceded that. And there probably wasn't until I got into a few situations where it became clear that not only would the men naturally be deferred to, naturally be promoted, naturally be preferred, but actually there was some active undermining, active destabilising going on. And I think I was sort of reeling from shock to begin with about that before I was able to sort of recover and figure out strategies for coping with that. And I think some of it is just because in so many, many, many organisational environments, whether you're talking about charities, public sector, the church, private sector, any of these environments, they've played into a male physiology which is all about rugger and a competition and winning and all these kinds of things. And that's locked into the economic system. It's locked into the legal system. We've got absolute beliefs about a competition, which means if you go into environments that have been predominantly male for as long as they have been, for most of the institutions I've worked with, there are just routines that are pretty brutal, because everything is a competition, everything is a fight, every email is an attack. And I guess if you're used to that, that's water off a duck's back. You just give as good as you get. But if you're me, that stuff hurts. And you have to think, well, is it necessary to be unpleasant? Is it necessary to be zero-sum game and point scoring? So I get underestimated a lot. And I think it's assumed that women are weak or rookies or rubbish or, whatever, when they make certain sorts of decisions, as I have done. And so I've had to spend more time than I would care to explaining the strategy behind many of my decisions, which I think are self-evident, but don't seem to play well into that sort of environment that's assumed that kind of default.
So did you feel like you changed those organisations? After you left, they were a better organisation than they were, or not?
I think in some situations, yes, some situations absolutely not. I certainly have made my mark on places changing approaches. I mean, one example, which I have talked about before, is when I was being chairman of Gordonstoun, and pretty much the first weekend I became a trustee for a few months before I became chairman. And pretty much the same weekend of my first board meeting, there was a huge article in the Observer about historic abuse at a school that had fed Gordonstoun. It was a prep school in Scotland. I mean, horrific abuse. And so because of the connection with Gordonstoun, which of course also means royal connection, also means headlines, the school was thrown into a situation where the governors, including me and as the incoming chair, had to figure out how should we be responding to this sort of scenario. And in those days, you were still being advised by your lawyers and your insurers that you just had to say no comment, do not engage, all that stuff. And of course, because I didn't have any experience with Gordonstoun, I had no skin in the game, I hadn't been there, I didn't really know anything about it. I only had my gut feel to go on, which is these people were injured by these institutions in a way that they should never have been. And we must talk to them, we must reach out, we must apologise, we must engage. And I remember at the time, there was still quite a male hierarchy around. And again, there was a feeling that this must be this new female chair, being a bit inexperienced, not really knowing how to do it. So there was a lot of incredibly well-intentioned rescuing going on to try and stop me exposing the organisation to something which was obviously unwise. So I'd spent quite a lot of time explaining why I thought my approach, which was about engaging with people, trying to understand how we could mend our ways, how we could really show we were sorry, how we could really change what we were doing, was not only the right thing to do, it was the least risky thing to do. And I suppose that was one of the first times I came up against this, what I felt was a gender difference in strategy around how you deal with very stressful situations. And that ushered in an approach towards child protection and historic abuse that has become standard, certainly in Scotland and elsewhere now, because it is about doing the right thing by survivors and not worrying so much about the institution.
So did you contact people from previously who'd been to the school and reach out to them?
Yeah, we wrote out to all alumni, and we were also very aware that when you have been abused by an institution, you often would not trust that institution, so you would not want to have anything to do with them. So we commissioned some independent people to do a listening exercise with any survivors who wanted to talk to them about what they would find helpful and what they genuinely needed for the school to do. And luckily we did that before the child abuse inquiry in Scotland kicked off, so we'd already started a process that meant we could kind of enter that process in a very healthy way and be more helpful to the whole inquiry because of the experience we'd already gained from engaging with our survivor community.
It's probably not what you expected when you signed up for the role.
No, but again, it was such a privilege because I was an unusual hire. I mean, I was from a state school, I was a girl, I was younger than everyone else, I had no form. So it was easy for me just to...
And probably a brave decision for them as well.
Yeah.
So why do you think they made that? They must have been open to some level of change.
I think so. I mean, I think they did describe it as a bold appointment, and I think they were quite I don't know. Why did they hire me? I think they thought because my leadership experience was very much looking at character, which is what Gordonstoun is all about. I had some quite useful intellectual frames that would help them understand what it was that they were doing with Gordonstoun. But also my business school background and all the charity experience I had meant I would be able to actually do the business of being a chair and running a board. Probably they got more than they bargained for because I'm quite a hands-on sort of a person. But it was a wonderful privilege to do that role.
So you've done a lot of very different things. I mean, this is probably quite unusual. After university, after your PhD maybe, how much of the future could you see? And is there a kind of thread that holds together all the things that you have done?
You're supposed to have a red thread, aren't you? My degree was theology. In the 90s, there weren't very many jobs going, so I applied for the church commissioners because I thought I would get the job because I had a theology degree. And they seemed eclectic enough, but also civil servanty enough that it would be a good generic place to do a graduate scheme and all of that. I think what that gave me was a curiosity about how organisations work and what makes them tick. So that was why I went off to do the MBA, because I wanted to understand what that really looked like in terms of nuts and bolts and processes and things. And I suppose what I learned there, because I then cashed that out practically by working at Deloitte in the change management practice for financial services, was that you can have the best strategy in the world, you can have all the comms plans you like, any system you want to bung in. But if the leaders are not up for it, people will follow the leader. So that's when I went to Ashridge to teach leadership, because I thought, well, if I can get these buggers to sort the thing out, then actually all that other stuff kind of makes sense. But you've got to have the leaders doing, showing everybody else what it is that they're committed to and role modelling. And I suppose behind that, all my intellectual work has been trying to understand the systems they're in. So the PhD in the Capitalism Toxic Assumptions book was about trying to understand the system and why people feel constrained within the system about whether they can be helpful or not. And then leadersmithing was about tooling people up to be able to change the system, to feel braver about that and to have the capacities and skills to do so. So that's all part of the same inquiry, really, which is what makes organisations and people tick and how do we drive towards a better future together.
Someone I talked to about you was they described you as naughty, and I think sometimes I think this is true. I've seen you in action, so you can probably fire an Exocet missile because what you say is probably different to how people think you're going to be in a room. How much has that impacted what you've done, do you think?
Well, I think it is probably vintage me, because I think they don't expect someone wearing pearls to say fuck off. And actually, when you're coming to a business school and you're a bit terrified because you think, I don't really know anything about these kind of university setups and I'll feel stupid. If you have me walking in and chatting away, then it demystifies it. It makes it feel accessible. I think also if you've done theology and you believe in God, people are inclined to think you're a bit holy-moly and not to kind of think you've got anything to say. So I think if you can slightly wrong foot them by being a bit more normal than they had imagined, then that tends to help the conversation. So I think I probably developed in a whole load of different scenarios an ability to disarm by being cheeky, and that tends to work.
Yeah, because someone also said about your faith is there as an underlying stream in your life, but it's not in people's face.
Yeah.
So how much does it affect what you deliver in, say, a business situation or a education situation?
Well, I think it's the ground on which I stand. And it was very interesting. I remember having the experience at Deloitte of they used to do these PowerPoints with all of the teammates, and they'd do a little potted biography of you for all your clients. And they'd always take out the church commissioners in my bio and substitute it with quasi-governmental financial institution.
Goodness me,
because they thought I might try and convert people. And I remember taking the view when I joined Ashridge that I was going to be honest about the fact that I had a theology degree and had worked for the church, because I also felt that people don't really talk about faith in business, but a huge number of people are motivated by their faith. And if they know they can pop over to you in the break and say, oh, actually, I believe this, what do you think about that? particularly when you're in coaching environments where often people are dealing with quite tricky moral dilemmas and they're drawing on their faith. And if they feel they can discuss that with you and bring that into the conversation, it helps them feel more resourced and feel able to problem solve. So I have become more out about my faith in business contexts, not because I'm trying to proselytise, but because I think it is a really important perspective.
And how do people react to that then?
Well, sometimes they just sort of think, well, you believe in fairies and therefore you're intellectually, embarrassing. Most people, I think, respect anyone who has an integrity to what they do. And I think I'm quite clear about what I do and why. So I think either people are not particularly interested or they're grateful that actually somebody is bothering with this kind of stuff. Some people feel threatened by it, but not too many, I don't think.
I was going to get onto this a bit later, but let's just briefly talk about your book, Robot Souls, which I read over the last few days. And I was pleased with the book that it is actually talking more about souls than robots, which made me happy, because I don't know if I could have read a book that was just on robots. But obviously you have a faith that there is something out there that's bigger than us. And the book really, I mean, you can say it better than me, but really you're talking about 7 different areas that can, these other aspects of being a human, be programmed into an AI machine. And probably you have a greater sense that some of them will than I do. I'm not sure I have as much confidence as you that some of this stuff will be programmed in. I'm interested to know, because the book really is, I think it's more about souls and consciousness than it is about AI. How close do you think we will get to AI having a sense of consciousness?
It depends very much how you define consciousness. I think AI is already conscious on lots of very basic levels, depending on how you want to define that. So an example would be that if you are a person operating in a 3D environment, you need to be able to read your environment. So, if you're about to bump into a chair or push something over, or, are you apologising to a person or a lamppost, that kind of thing. So AI in robots is already, quotes, self-aware in many situations because it has to have the ability to read its environment. And you can program it to do quite a rich readout of that environment, depending on how, far into that you want to go. There's another definition of consciousness, which is about your sort of subjective experience. So there's a lovely paper written by Thomas Nagel called What is it like to be a bat? And he talks about the fact that bats must feel batty, and there must be a thing called batness, and that actually we don't really know what it's like to be a bat, but they do. In the same way, I don't really know what it's like to be Poole, but I can guess a bit because I know what it's like to be Eve. But I can't ever say I can have a Poole experience because I'm not Poole. So he would argue that anything that can articulate a subjective experience would have a claim to be conscious. And that would mean if a robot could articulate that because it has robotness and is feeling roboty, then it would be conscious. So on those sorts of very basic levels, you could argue that AI in various incarnations is already conscious. But I think most humans would argue that there's something very phenomenologically different about tasting coffee or hearing a pin drop or looking at a sunset or smelling fresh bread, that are very particular visceral experiences that only humans can really have. Some animals may have those sorts of experiences, but they can't turn them into sort of constructs and meaning-making, phenomena in the way that humans can. And certainly there are lots of, most people talk about ChatGPT as the sort of archetypal AI, and that's not really a very complicated AI, really. It's a bit like predictive text on your phone, but just kind of turbocharged. I don't think that is conscious or can think. But I think there will be types of AI that can argue enough consciousness that we need to give them some sorts of recognition and protection in law because of that.
Is not the problem, though, that the people programming the AI are coming from a mechanistic, materialist worldview? So that the extra stuff, the ESP or the sixth sense, I think you call it in the book, that's never going to be programmed in because they probably don't believe in it anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's why in the book I talk about junk code, because I talk about all the stuff we've left out of AI because we're a bit embarrassed about it. We think it's a bit rubbish, emotions and intuition and all that kind of junk. And I think genuinely there are lots of people in the world who do think those are flaws in our design. And I suppose this is where my Christian framing would come in, which is I believe we were made by God and made to be perfect for God's ends, and in my tradition made in the image of God to boot, which suggests that they wouldn't be flaws, because why would God design something with inbuilt flaws? They must be features. And if they're features, well, what are they for? So the book is really an investigation into all this overlooked junk code to say, well, actually, when you look at it together, you can see what the function of all these sort of things like uncertainty and intuition are. And because they're so useful to our design, we probably need to take them more seriously in terms of design of AI.
So just translating that back into the business situation, quite a few people, most people listening to this are in the business world. You talk about business spirituality. So from the writing of the book, would you say that quite a lot of what you write about in the book actually it's not in AI currently, and it's probably not in many business situations
either? Well, it's in funny pockets. I mean, I'm talking a lot to lawyers, people in HR, a whole load of communities who are already affected by AI and will increasingly be so. And one of the things that's really interesting, if you think about HR, there's lots of stuff you can bung into AI, doing a load of kind of competence frameworks and putting in a load of policy around stuff. And you can see all that stuff is readily delegatable to machines. But when you think about the stuff as people about what will land, when you walk into the front of an organisation and you're in the lobby and you kind of get a sense from what people are saying, what they're not saying, whether people are walking fast, walking slow, looking happy, not looking happy. Of course, you could turn all that into data and you could analyse it, but humans are brilliant at stepping into a space with other humans and immediately having a readout. So if you're trying to do change management, if you're trying to introduce new values, if you're trying to motivate people to achieve amazing things, that's a thing that is about how do you use your peripheral vision to read their soul so that you can talk to their soul about that. It's not just about, robotics and programming.
Okay, that's really interesting. So how do you train people to do that?
Well, I think we just do it, don't we? I mean, Wittgenstein's really interesting on this. He has a big thing in one of his essays about not treating someone as though they're an automaton. So he says, if you tell me that you've got a sore hand, I don't take your hand and stare at your fingers. I stare at you and say, oh, poor Paul, I'm sorry to hear about that. Because I realise it's you that's hurt, not your hand. And that's just an instinct that people have because they're dealing with you as though you have a soul, not because you're an automaton. And it's just part of our coding. It's part of how we have been created to survive in community with other people, in relationship with other people. So we've had a lot of conditioning away from that by the Industrial Revolution, by training, by a whole load of old stuff to try and become more like robots. But I think what's happening in our generation is that there is now no point in competing with robots because they've already won. So we have to rediscover the things that robots can't do, rediscover our own humanity, because that's the only way we're going to be able to flourish.
Yes, and I think probably 20 years ago plus in business, people were probably treated like robots and not humans.
Yeah, scientific management.
I think we have moved forward. How much more do you think we can bring spirituality into the business context?
Well, I think it's about trying to at least allow the conversation. I mean, the sort of evolution in thinking about leadership is quite interesting on this, and the kind of different ages there have been in sort of management consultancy and thinking about kind of organizational science. And we did start from a very kind of production line kind of manufacturing mindset. Particularly in this country, the vast majority of people are in the services industry anyway, even though if you go on your MBA, you're still talking about inventory and a whole load of stuff that assumes that manufacturing model, which is sadly not so strong in the UK anymore. Services is all about servicing people. It's all about being of value to other people. And if you want to really be of service, then you're trying to serve that whole person. Branding gets this because, of course, branding itself has been on a journey to not just be talking about products and features and benefits, but to be talking about values and relationship.
And branding is emotional, isn't it? There's a big emotional context.
And it's about relationship.
Yeah.
So it's trading on a whole load of stuff we know about holistic people to pull that off. And we just need to be less cynical about that, more open about it. And I suppose less instrumentalist about it too, and not just use it to try and make a load of profit. But to understand that the realities of life in all its fullness are what drive people. And if you want the best of them at work, then you need to respect that and enable it.
And how hopeful are you about AI, that it will be good for humanity rather than bad for humanity?
I think at the moment it's not good enough, which is why I wrote the book, because I think we have a course correction opportunity now that we need to take quite urgently. On the one hand, there's nothing to worry about. It's just a tool like many others. But we're already seeing where it is creating anomalies that we had not prepared for. So I do a lot of work in education. The teenage brain is not very interested in learning the hard way. So if you could cheat and you'd never get found out, why wouldn't you? So you've then aced your A-levels, you've got into a fantastic university. You're now having to run 50 jobs to pay for that. They're not very interested in your essay deadlines, so you use ChatGPT again because, hey, nobody will know. You enter the workplace with an empty brain because you haven't learnt nothing because the kit has done it all for you. And luckily, you don't need to worry about that because you've now got ChatGPT doing all your entry level, being a solicitor, doing your finance stuff, accountancy, whatever it is, your middle class profession that you've paid all that money, being educated to go and do. But where are we going to get leaders from if they've not had any of that development, if there's been no trajectory? How do you actually learn wisdom if you haven't had those experiences? And so increasingly, I think that we will rue the day that we didn't do better thinking about the kind of glib way we're just outsourcing a whole load of stuff to AI without thinking about what that might mean for us.
Well, this plays into education, which is the field you've spent a lot of time in, and we've got to get away from teaching facts, haven't we?
Completely.
I mean, what a waste of time.
Well, also, this lovely obsession with STEM at the moment, which I love from a gender point of view, because actually there are too few women in those fields and we need to correct that. But why are we even bothering with that? Because the AI can already do all of those things better than we'll ever be able to do. What it can't do is figure out what's true, what's not true, figure out what values are, all these kinds of things that the humanities teach you and make you really good at, which are actually the skills we need to be able to cope in a co-intelligence world.
So how do we teach wisdom at schools? How do we teach teenagers wisdom?
Well, kids are pretty good at wisdom and values, actually, but we train it out of them. So I've been talking in a variety of places about how do you teach philosophy and ethics to primary school children. And actually, they don't need to learn from you about that. They're in the playground every day. They know who the bullies are. They know what's fair. They know when somebody's being nasty. They know a whole load of quite sophisticated, in terms of the trolley problem, which people write essays about at university.
The trolley problem?
The trolley problem is that whole thing where you're on a speeding trolley bus and you're about to knock over a granny, and if you pull a lever, you'll knock over a cat instead. It's all the sort of stuff they're programming into autonomous cars. But it's a classic sort of archetypal philosophy problem about how do you decide, least harm, and it's utilitarianism and all that. Kids do that all day because they're trying to figure out, he's got more cake than me. If I steal his cake, he won't invite me to his party. There's a whole load of stuff where on a very basic level, kids are doing quite sophisticated ethics, particularly if they've got siblings and dealing with parents every day. But it's not honoured as them learning wisdom. And when kids do that very early learning that you see quite viscerally, when they learn to hold their tongues and they learn to, there was that whole thing about the marshmallow test, and it's about deferring reward. You see that happening in children at quite a young age, but it's not contextualised, debriefed, honoured, and explained back to them that they're learning virtue ethics. And actually, if it was, that would help them appreciate that they're already wise, and what they need to do is be wiser around a wider range of scenarios with more facts at their disposal.
Yeah. Well, I think, yes, I'm pleased you're in the education space because we've got a lot of changing to do there, definitely. Yeah. I want to change tack slightly and talk about your own spirituality. So, the sometimes when we talk about this, the people equate religion with spirituality, which I think is important to separate the two. There's a lot of religious stuff that has no spirituality at all. How would you define a spirituality? How would you define yourself as a spiritual person? What difference does it make in your everyday life?
I suppose it's about a wider frame and feeling that there are other realities that are relevant and important. And in my case, I happen to believe in a God. Many people would call that something else, about meaning and purpose and, why the planet is here and where we're all going as a creation, or all those kinds of other things. But it is a sense of a framing of meaning and purpose and a teleology about there being some trajectory which is about improvement and good. And I suppose my spirituality is about being more peripherally aware of creation, people, values, meaning, purpose, history, the future, all those sort of wider things. And trying to understand how you are purposeful about even the mundane things that you do so that you can fit them into that meaning-making, purposeful frame. So I happen to have a Christian practice which gives me a whole load of liturgy and a whole load of forms of prayer and practices that help me try and keep on the straight and narrow around doing more good than bad, being sorry for terrible decisions, making reparation where I can, striving to be ever better, all those kinds of things. But I suppose I happen to have that as my religious framing, but I see those spiritualities in such a wide variety of people who've never been anywhere near religion, and neither would they choose to be, who nevertheless have a very clear sense of meaning and purpose in the world around them.
And what does it mean in terms of the day-to-day thing, spiritual practices? What do you do, and how does it affect you on a daily basis?
I suppose one of the things I've noticed, particularly around taking on these senior leadership roles, is it makes me very certain, because when you are, your function as a senior person is just to make a load of decisions, really, so that the rest of the organisation can crack on. And that's quite a lonely position to be in, because you'll not get clean feedback about that. There are very few people who understand as much about the situation as you do, and you'll either be popular or not popular. And it would be very easy to kind of adjust who you are and whether you think you're any good on the basis of what the reaction to the last decision you made was. And it's very easy for those things to sort of throw you off course. And I suppose because I'm very clear about meaning and purpose and the wider framing of what I'm doing and why, it allows me to stick to my guns a bit more, and therefore makes me braver around some decisions that will be unpopular or will be misunderstood.
So how does going through a difficult time, has your spirituality helped you change as a result of that? I mean, quite a few people we've had on here have had some level of trauma, great or small, and they've used that as a springboard to doing something different and perhaps bigger in their future. Has that been the case with you? And if so, how have you changed through those difficult times?
Well, I think yes and no. I mean, I've been reading a lot of Julian of Norwich recently, and one of the things that is very interesting in her showings is that she feels God said to her, "You will not be overcome." And I have very much felt held in my life that I will not be overcome. And I have had some very difficult situations, and I have not been overcome. And the more of those situations you have when you're not overcome, you realise that you may survive the next one as well. So I had a period in the Church of England when I was very badly bullied, for instance. And in that environment, it's even worse because you have the spiritual overlay and there's a whole load of difficult stuff going on there. And I think what I drew on there was my faith, even though it was also the same faith that was informing some of that bad behaviour. But also the fact that I had, against the odd, managed to have twins, which was quite a complicated and lengthy process. And I had given birth to 2 of them, one after the other, 9 minutes apart, with teams of people around me. And actually, I would see these gentlemen, it tended to be, who were being horrid. And I'd think, well, you couldn't give birth to twins in the dead of night, one after the other, could you? And I thought, I'm not actually breakable, and I will not be overcome, but I have choices. And because I was very clear about my faith, when I felt there was behaviour going on that I was not happy about, I was very clear about where my lines were and when I would throw the towel and when I wouldn't. So I think that gave me a steeliness and a feeling that God was on my side, and that there were certain things I would put up with and certain things I wouldn't.
And how long did you put up with it?
3 years. I had a 5-year appointment for that particular role, but my objectives were delivered after 3, and I promised myself that the day that they were, I would resign, because actually that environment was not conducive.
And do they know why you resigned?
Some people do, I think. A lot has come out in the past wee while that makes that probably more evident. But I was going off to write my Robot Souls book, so many people just thought that was more important.
And have you forgiven the bullies, and how easy is it to forgive people who've wronged you?
Forgive is such an interesting word, isn't it? I suppose I do understand. I really, really understand where that behaviour came from and why. And I suppose that was my particular burden in that role, that I had so much insight from having taught leadership for so long that I could see it coming a mile off. And you sort of wanted to pass them a card and say, unwise, please don't, course correct. Because you could kind of see it playing out in a kind of slow-mo train crash. And I felt devastated by that. And not actually for me, even though I knew it was going to hurt, because I just sort of felt it's conduct unbecoming and it's not wise. and you wanted to sort of take them aside and give them a bit of advice and say, mate, don't go there. And so I suppose that was the double tragedy, is I could see them coming. I knew what was going to happen. There was no point in me getting out of the way in most of those situations. I just had to bear it. But I remember finding a postcard of that wonderful picture of St. Sebastian covered in arrows, bleeding, which just is what it felt. Every day it felt like I was just covered in arrows and I was bleeding.
Oh, I'm sorry you had such a difficult time. But
I managed to get a lot of stuff done, don't worry.
Okay. Yeah.
That was possibly why I had such a difficult time, because I did get really quite a lot done.
And how will that affect what you do in the future, do you think?
Well, again, I do have allergic reactions to situations that I know will be toxic, and I think I am less able to put up with those now. Less able? I'm probably more able, but less willing. And so I think when I'm in a situation that I think is going that way, then I will tend to exit faster than I ever would have done before.
So what do you think you will be doing in, say, 10 years' time? Any ideas or not?
Well, it's very funny. I mean, I was an academic leadership person, taught a load of leaders, hung out with them all. I didn't think I was ever going to be a leader. I didn't necessarily know I was going to be good at it, but I think I am quite a good leader. I think it's more costly than I thought it would be, so I have to be quite careful about what I lead, because it has to be worth it. But I think that is a vocation I need to pursue. But I also really do like writing. I like being able to take quite disparate ideas and quite complex ideas and make them accessible and practical for people. So I imagine there won't be any glamorous change. I'll probably still be leading things and writing books.
And what advice would you give to leaders, say someone who's just come into a leadership position, maybe 30 years old? What would you say to them from what you've learned about leadership?
I think you have to be incredibly clear about who you actually are, because it's very tempting to try on loads of other different leadership roles for size and be all kinds of different people. I mean, it's no coincidence that you go into a bookshop and the business section on leadership is all biographies, because, today we're going to be Nelson Mandela, tomorrow we're going to be Elon Musk, whatever your preference is. There's a big tradition of that, but you can't just be someone else. You've got to figure out who you are as a leader, because you will get all kinds of mixed signals, funny feedback, setbacks, all kinds of stuff. But if you're crystal clear about what you stand for and who you are, then you can decide what is worth your time and energy and what isn't.
And how do you find that out? Because some people are probably projected what they are based on some of those books they've read. So how do you discover who you are, if you like? your own purpose.
You do have to be quite fearless, and you have to go for stuff. I mean, there's an awful lot of people who kind of hide, and they hide in their little expertise and get steadily better and better at it and avoid difficult things. I guess, and I would say this because I've been chairman of Gordonstoun, I've written about leadersmithing. For me, you have to seek out opportunities to build your character, and you have to seek out opportunities to hone your virtues. And that means you have to stick your hand up and volunteer for all kinds of stuff that frankly makes you feel sick, because it's only by surviving those things that you really learn what your mettle is, what you're up for, what you're good at, where your limits are. Otherwise, you're fighting blind. So an awful lot of it is just forcing yourself into all kinds of experiences wherever you possibly can to feel the limits and find out where they are.
So taking risks.
Absolutely, absolutely. You've just got to jump out a lot of the planes, I think.
There's a lot of talk of imposter syndrome.
I love imposter syndrome. I think if you ever meet somebody who doesn't have it, you should immediately run away screaming because they're probably a psychopath. Imposter syndrome is brilliant because it makes you keep trying. It makes you humble because you think, oh, God, any minute now my mum's going to phone up and say, I haven't tidied your room. I haven't got 99% or whatever. And I think actually imposter syndrome makes you keep stopping and thinking, am I completely deluded? Am I a complete twat? Do they think I'm an idiot? And it makes you keep listening. It makes you keep trying. You must never let it be an excuse, though. A lot of people say, oh, it's just little me. And that's the Mandela thing about knowing your power. Leaders have extraordinary power, and too many of them abuse it because they like to pretend it's not there. So I think imposter syndrome is to be taken terribly seriously, and you should be really interested in your own imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I remember after I'd written my first book, I was in a car accident. Someone rammed me, had to be checked out. Insurance purposes, and I thought I'm just going to try this out. So when I go to the desk in casualty and they say, what's your name, address, and profession, and I said author, but then burst laughing because obviously I wasn't really an author, even though I'd written a book. It was not part of me.
Yeah.
Still isn't, probably.
But I think the first thing I'd say about anybody that thinks they've got imposter syndrome is they can't find you out if you've already found yourself out. So I'm very clear about my faults. I've got a lot of them. There are a lot of things I'm completely crap at. But if you know that already, then if somebody says, Eve, you haven't checked those numbers, have you? Your email's full of mistakes. Then I'm just like, yeah, sorry, I know.
Yes.
That's why I have my husband proofread all my books, because he's really good at that stuff.
Yes, knowing what you're not good at is an important
and you only
start
find
point.
that out by just jumping out a load of planes until, you find out who's packed your parachute.
Do you think you'll ever end up in politics? Someone I talked to did suggest you'd make a good Prime Minister.
I'd be an excellent Prime Minister. I'd be an excellent Archbishop. I'd be good at a whole load of things, but I think I know the cost of those. You have to be able to submit yourself to just extraordinary public vitriol. And I've learned that I'm not thick-skinned enough for that. I'd like to be. I'd like to be able to brush that stuff off. But I think what makes me good at what I do is that I really, really, really care. And because of that, I probably care too much to do anything that's too in the public eye.
Talk to me about the OBE. I mean, it is, I think you're the first person with something like that we've had on this podcast. What was the feeling like? Was it, I presume it was a big surprise, or were you expecting it?
Well, I was sat in the pub with my husband, and we were having a lunchtime pint, and I got this message on my phone, and I just assumed it was spam. So I had a look at it, and I thought, that's a bit weird. So I passed it over to my husband and said, do you think this is spam? He said, no, Eve, I think you've got an OBE.
Well, they sent a text, did they?
They send you an email.
Oh, is that
Yeah,
really?
these days, yes. I think it used to probably be proclamations by
What,
pigeon
town
post
crier,
or something.
yeah.
But no, these days it's an email. And I was thrilled that it was for education and gender diversity, because the role I had at Gordonstoun felt really important to me, and I'd worked very hard. Yeah. And I was sad in a way that there wasn't anything about the cathedrals, but I think the timing was just not right for that. It was a Gordonstoun gong rather than a cathedrals one, because I did a lot of amazing work there that I'm very proud of too. But I was just very chuffed because it's a very unusual sort of badge of approval. There's lots of other things. You get pay rises, or you get, industry awards, or you get good feedback or whatever. But it felt like it was genuinely an honour, because it felt that the nation had looked at Poole and thought she's done a good job there. And so I felt hugely proud of that.
And how do you feel about it having the word empire in the title?
Well, I think again, it's one of these things that people just mutter about OBEs and they don't really think about what it's really denoting. I like to think about the heritage, which it was one of the first civilian honours, because all the honours were military before that, and it was one of the first ones that could be awarded to a woman. So I very much stood in that tradition, that there were a lot of women in my family who should have had gongs probably in history, and I was proud to be a woman in my family getting one. So yes, I would have issues if I was going to sit down and write an essay about it. But I think in the spirit in which it was intended, which was national recognition of a job well done at Gordonstoun, I just felt really thrilled.
And do you get, when you get it, I did see the photo of you receiving it, do you get a chance to have a conversation with the King? Was it the King that presented it?
It was the King, yeah. They don't tell you until you're sort of on the way up the stairs.
Do you get a chance to have a chat with him?
Yeah, you do get a wee chat, yeah.
Which you're not allowed to talk about, of course.
No. Of course, he went to Gordonstoun, so we had a nice chat about that.
Yes, I did wonder, yeah. So we're coming towards the end of our time, and there's some questions that I ask all my guests, and you're not getting off the hook. So the first one is a piece of advice you wish you had when you started out that you didn't get.
I wish I'd known I could do it. I mean, that's one thing that a lot of leaders say when you ask them, what they wish they'd known 10 years ago, because too many of us are not given accurate feedback at the right level to know how good or actually how bad we are. And I am a better leader than I ever thought I could be, and I could have been doing that from an earlier point in my career if I'd known that.
Do you think you needed someone to believe in you more then when you...
Yeah, I mean, I have been very lucky with mentors, and it is interesting. I wrote a bit about that in Leadersmithing, thinking about who does bring you on in your career. But maybe it wasn't that maybe I didn't look like a sort of standard leader. Maybe that I wasn't sort of in the frame for things.
That's a very good thing, in my opinion.
So it took me longer for that to become a reality. And I think I still do surprise people. I don't think people necessarily expect me to be leading some of the things that I lead. But hopefully I do it well, and hopefully that inspires other people around me to have a go.
Oh, yes, it's definitely inspired me, and I know many other people you've also inspired. A piece of well-meaning advice that you did have but have completely ignored.
So I'd been a Third Church States Commissioner for a few weeks, and I was one of the only people that had an office. My office had a beautiful view of Westminster Abbey, and you could hear the bells. I was sat in my office being frightfully Third Church States Commissioner, and in comes the union rep, sits down and said, "I've got some feedback for you." He said, "You've got to stop fucking swearing, you've got to stop that hugging." So I didn't stop the swearing and I didn't stop the hugging, because actually that's very much who I am. So that was well-meaning advice that I did ignore.
Excellent. More hugs. In fact, I just read something earlier today about needing more hugs required in the workplace. So the trouble is the HR department might not approve. But and I've written a book as well on 50 characteristics of good leadership, which isn't exhaustive. I thought of probably 3 or 4 more since. But from those 50, which of those 50 do you think you most, or are you working on currently, or which do you most need to work on?
I remember when I was being interviewed for my very first job, the Church Commissioners, when I was, 21 or whatever it was. I remember being asked which virtue I wished I possessed. And I remember it was always patience. I've always been incredibly impatient. I very much have that Andrew Marvell thing at my back. I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near. I've always been in a rush. So patience is something I really have to think very hard about, and I've still not got that right. I think you also talk about silence. I'm very bad about being silent. I do like to fill the space. It was good to have had some training and coaching, because that does make you learn practices of silence and listening, which I do try and remember to draw on rather than just bang on all the time. But I think my biggest issue from your list is being non-judgmental. I'm an incredibly judgmental person, and I have a tendency to sort of make very quick and fast judgments, often about people and competence, which I think can be unkind. So that's something I'm very aware that I have to really sit with, is trying not just to assume people are rubbish, when actually there's probably lots of other reasons that they haven't done what you thought they said they were going to do. So being too judgmental, I think, is one of my besetting sins.
Maybe that comes from your dad with
Probably.
your exam results.
99%.
Good. Well, thanks very much for your vulnerability. We massively appreciate that. You have inspired many people, and you've broken through barriers, I think, as many other people will benefit from following in your path. And I look forward to seeing what you get up to in the next few years.
Thank you. And thank you for
in
all these
some
lovely
sense,
questions.
I get the sense that there's something bigger ahead that we're yet to see. So.
Yes, be afraid, be very afraid.
Thanks very much for being a guest on The Fourth Bottom Line.
Thank you.
We really hope you enjoyed this episode of The Fourth Bottom Line. Please hit subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode, and do leave a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to learn more about my work, follow me on LinkedIn, visit my website, paulhargreaves.co.uk, or look out for my 2 books, Forces for Good and The Fourth Bottom Line. Thank you so much for listening.